This video is a bonus lecture to my course on the self, human suffering, and the meaning of life. So it might be a little bit esoteric. But we're going to be talking about rituals. When we do rituals for religions, what are they really trying to do? And are they trying to gauge the bodily desires or trying to act with the bodily desires? The body desires, which is the way the universe wants us to act. A way we're supposed to act that has kind of already been determined by causality in some sense. So when we think of someone doing a ritual, we have these in many different contexts. But even the very act of, the Christian praying is a ritual. We're doing something in order to kind of gauge a gap. And the Buddhist lineages, we have the Tibetan rituals of chanting, the Zen rituals of kind of embodying the ritual, and even the Theravada rituals of even the meditations, chanting more, and then some certain other actions that they do. In all of these, what are they trying to do? We have an article by Jonathan Z. Smith, The Bare Facts Rituals, which kind of gets at this point where rituals are not trying to show perfection. They're not actually trying to achieve anything. What they're trying to do really is just to ponder the gap between our existence and the perfect existence. Even though the perfect existence is inaccessible to us. So that would mean we do rituals not because we're trying to achieve anything, not because we believe the goal is in fact achievable, but rather because the ritual is there to just ponder the fact that there is a difference. And that pondering in the fact that there's a difference will make us look at our own lives through potentially a more broadened scope. So that theory, I think, stands in terms of the framework that we built in the course, as we explained in our theory of religions and such. But I'm trying to get this other point, which is when we're embracing and trying to understand this gap, are we simply just doing whatever? Or are we just following our delusional desires and doing whatever? Or are we in some way trying to emulate bodily desires? This becomes a fascinating question to me when I think about like Zen Buddhism, and we see monks kind of being taught that there is nothing to achieve, therefore just be, and so throughout their day, the bell rings and you meditate. The bell rings, you go eat, and when you're eating, you're just focused on everything that has to do with the eating process. Or you have your chopstick laid down. You watch your hand as you pick up the chopstick. You focus on the food inside the bowl. Focus on how the food feels in your mouth. I mean, there's a sort of a mindful element as well, but there's a very sort of just do it, right? You are, in some sense, the Buddha already. And that's interesting because we see rituals that come before Zen often have the elements of we're doing something external, right? We're chanting to this higher deity who will help us. In the Pure Land lineages, sects, we have this sort of nembutsu, where they're saying these lines that are trying to allow them to find refuge in another world. Or the Christian prayer, right? I'm praying to God to let the God come out and get me. So the rituals end up turning in very different directions. And then the question here is that for the undefiled observer who acts only in bodily desires, right? Are the people in the ritual trying to act like undefiled observers? Are they trying to emulate pure bodily desires? And this is something interesting to think about, right? Because, undefiled observers is the sort of thing that created the gap in the first place. Without the undefiled observers, there would be no religions, according to my framework. And so then in the rituals are the defiled observers, where the people who are trying to gauge this gap, just trying to act like the undefiled observer. In some sense, are the people who practitioners of Buddhism trying to act like the Buddha, or are they doing something else? or the practitioners of Christianity trying to act like Jesus Christ. And I think the answer to this really is that if we look back at this Jonathan J.Z. Smith article we're trying to reference, in that ritual of the bear, of killing the bear in a very peaceful way, the ritual that they're doing to the bear, where they're dressing it up, talking to it sweetly, and before caressing it while it's slowly and painlessly killing it, is sort of unrealistic. Even if the bear ritual could, or even if the bear killing could be perfect in some sense, it wouldn't be like that. And another way of saying that is, like, even if there was an undefiled observer in this world, they would not necessarily act with the sort of rituals that religions are often doing. So, for example, the chanting, the constant, this sort of extensive sorts of rituals and ceremonies that they're doing. Extensive retreats of deep meditation, or whatnot. I think these are not as much as bodily desires, but more so acts of trying to understand the gap. It is almost the hyperbole of practices that are intended to extremify the difference between us, the normal life, and the sacred and the perfect life. And you can kind of see that in Zen Buddhism, even as they're trying to act as sort of they're the Buddha already, there's still, exaggerations of certain things. The Kai-Ho-Gyo is a certain example of this, where monks go on 1,000-day hikes and runs every day for around eight hours or so. Would an undefiled observer, who simply the only difference is that they could not see essence, really partake on the same level of task? The answer to that is no. They probably wouldn't, because there's no need to. It is only because you're a defiled observer, or because someone's a defiled observer, they'll have the need to push the boundaries of who they are and what the gap is in order to try to understand the gap. So the rituals are not then, in a sense, following the bodily desires of an undefiled observer. And this also gets to this question. There's delusional desires that are product of culture and product of false beliefs, and there's also bodily desires, which is how you're supposed to be. Are religions and rituals then delusional desires or bodily desires? Are we disposed in some sense to do the bodily desires, or is it just purely part of culture? And here's the way it gets tricky, is because the delusional desires, remember, for the first in the first part, delusional desires can be either for or against the universe stream. You can go with your needs or against your needs. And the culture makes the delusional desires, and in certain sense, the culture makes a religion. And so then following the religion is just some sort of delusional desire. But remember, because the delusional desire can be for you, this religion and the rituals you do in the religion can then also be for you as well. So in some sense, the religions are delusional desires, the rituals are delusional desires, but these help you. These help you get more in line with a certain deeper truth of the world, even if it's not a bodily desire itself. And I think that's tricky. Like I'm realizing it's tricky as I'm trying to explain it. But it's almost as if, if you're living in a hunter-gatherer band, and your culture is sort of the notion of, like, you are a part of the group, you're a small limb of the body of the tribe. That is a culture as well, and that will create a delusional desire. But that delusional desire synchronizes more with the body desire of being of need, being part of a community, and doing something for someone else, right? Satisfying Viktor Frankl's sort of meaning of life. That delusional desire fits in with the body desire, and so in some sense, the religious delusional desire of believing that, or just following these rituals, is a delusional desire, but yet it's doing something that is deeply important in the human condition to understand, which is that there is a dissonance between the truth and what we're actually in right now. And by following this delusional desire, you will have a better chance at gauging this gap and understanding it more. And the other really tricky part of this, and it gets into question, is that this problem that we're even facing in the first place about our condition now and the way it really should be is only really a lot more apparent as we become increasingly deviant from when there's a bigger contrast between the delusional desires and the bodily desires. So when we come into a modern society where the delusional desires of a culture are so antagonist to what we really want as human beings, in those situations, this gap becomes pronounced. So then religion, as a delusional desire, will play a bigger role in helping us out, play a bigger role in terms of helping us understand our differences. Like in the hunter-gatherer societies, the gap wouldn't be as big, or it wouldn't be as pronounced, so the delusional desires of religion would potentially make not as much sense. And so this is tricky, right? Because that means it's to say that the thing that the delusional desires of religion are trying to fix are in itself a product of the difference in society since the beginning to now. Difference between us and hunter-gatherers. And that's interesting because it's not so much as the idea as it's following a human biological need. Religion's not satisfying a human biological need, but it's satisfying something that we've pronounced for ourselves. We've made a salient issue because we've deviated so much. And that poses a huge psychological and sociological problem, because it's then to say that the consequences of switching from hunter-gatherer, how we have evolutionarily adapted to our modern society is such a drastic change that not only can we not have anticipated so many of the effects that it would have on us, but that one of the most drastic effects is very philosophically difficult to understand. And it's this thing that my course is trying to understand. It's this idea of self. It's the idea of illusory self and suffering. But to understand how we change from hunter-gatherers to this current society, and that change arises and that causes a bigger problem, is so difficult because it needs to involve so many different fields of study. Anthropology, biology, psychology, philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, or a little bit of theology, right? Because then how else can you make sense of it? But yet it is something that looms in our society and is ever more present and a threat to our sort of existence. So it's of ever more importance even now. Enemies forming, countries being divided, all the mental problems in the world, division, inequality, corrupt economic systems, corrupt political systems. So much of it can be defined by and interpreted through this framework. Were people in hunter-gatherer tribes necessarily not angry with one another, not divisive? No, they could have had the disposition to do so, but since the delusional desires of the culture were sort of harmonizing the people together, they would have less of a way of doing that. There would be less incentives or less, causes for that to happen. So the delusional desires of those societies would naturally evolve to be well-fitting. And that makes sense because in some sense, evolution could have accounted for that, right? Evolution accounts for the fact that delusional desires can abide with our biological systems. But potentially evolution cannot account for the fact that our culture could rapidly evolve so fast. As Yuval Noah Harari says, the cultural evolution is faster than biological evolution. And now that creates a dissonance that there's so many problems and new things to even think about. I think in a near future video, I'm going to be talking about this idea of relating this to a sort of Fermi's paradox, in where even though there's so much potential for life out there, we have found none. And why is that? Maybe potentially there's this idea of the filter theory, where there's something filtering life from getting to a certain stage. And then there's this notion that I'm thinking about, where it's that, this moment where we have a huge dissonance in culture and body desires, or a time where we can separate from the universe stream, we can go against the universe stream, that these will create problems for us, problems for life that can never be sort of reversed. In some sense, as soon as life begins to have consciousness, inevitably there will be this problem of illusory self. And then inevitably there will be this problem of cultural evolution that is fashioned in biological evolution, which will cause a distance between the delusional desires and the body desires, which will make it so that people will eventually follow delusional desires so much to the point where they kill themselves and destroy themselves in an attempt of doing so. Just like we're creating AI and technology and nuclear bombs to the point where technology as a whole might threaten human existence, we are making the bomb that is going to explode ourselves in the first place. And why is that happening at all? It has to do with these theories that we're building. And this could be the great filter in some sense. The great filter comes about because of this sort of illusory self and consciousness, which we're going to be trying to analyzing in my course. But this is philosophically very, very complex, and it's interesting to think about. And I'm going off on a side tangent, but this video started off with this idea of ritual, and we're doing ritual 4. And that, I guess that's the whole idea of religion is important, understanding this whole bigger nuanced problem and rituals. Anyways, I went on for a long time. I hope you enjoy this video. I'm doing a course. There's a bunch of stuff everywhere to find it. And please feel free to leave your comments. Thank you.